space. And with stereophonic recording, the feeling of space and perspective is brought to you.
Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of the Silent Feedback Podcast. I'm your host Josh, and for today's episode, I am going to be doing a top 10 list, and it's going to be my top 10 favorite comic book movies of all time. Now, this was a really fun list to put together because I'm a big comic book fan and a big fan of comic book movies. So it was really fun to go over all the movies I've seen and pick out my top 10. It's also really hard to narrow it down to just 10, so I do have some honorable mentions that we'll talk about later on. But let's just get started with number 10 on my list, which is Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. Now, this movie was a sequel to the 2004 film Hellboy, which was directed by Guillermo del Toro. He also directs this movie. If you don't know Guillermo del Toro, he's best known as a horror director, but he's also directed movies like Pacific Rim and The Shape of Water. Hellboy is a comic book character that was created by Mike Magnolia and published by Dark Horse Comics. His first appearance was in August 1993 in the book San Diego Comic-Con Comics number 2, and then he had a standalone series called Hellboy: Seed of Destruction, which ran from March 1994 to June 1994. This film was released in July 11th, 2008, and the main cast members were Ron Perlman, Selma Blair, Doug Jones, Jeffrey Tambor, and Luke Goss. So a little bit of background on Hellboy. Hellboy basically is a half-demon who was summoned to Earth from Hell as a baby by Nazi cult members. He was founded by Allied forces during World War II, and among them was Professor Trevor Bruttenholm, who took in Hellboy, raised him as his son. He formed the United States Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense, which is the agency that Hellboy works for, and him and his team protect the world from evil forces that show up from the underworld. So again, this movie is a sequel to the first one that came out in 2004, and in this film you have Hellboy, his girlfriend Liz, who has pyrokinetic powers, and Abe Sapien, who's like his best friend. He has this like fish-like body, and he's like kind of this smart scientist, one of the group. They face off against Prince Nuada, who's like the villain of the movie, and he wants to bring about the Golden Army, which is like this ancient army that's very powerful. He wants to kill all the humans and have all his fantasy creatures roam the earth. So it's up to Hellboy and his team to stop him. Overall, I really just enjoyed the heart and emotion in this film, especially for a comic book movie. I also liked that it just felt different from the normal superhero films. You know, Hellboy's not this super overpowered hero. He doesn't have any crazy superpowers. He basically just fights enemies with his gun. He has different variations of that gun. And then he has his right hand. It's called the Hand of Stone. It's like this huge hand compared to his other hand. And, he uses that to fight enemies. But I just like how it's a very stripped down version of a comic book film. I like the chemistry he has with his team, his girlfriend Liz, played by Selma Blair. I think she is kind of the heart of the film because you find out that she's pregnant with Hellboy's baby, and she doesn't want to tell Hellboy because they're having problems in their relationship, and she feels like Hellboy doesn't care about her as much as he cares about himself. So that's one of the conflicts in the film. Another one is you have Abe, Sabian, who's like Hellboy's best friend, he's part of the group, played by Doug Jones. He falls in love with the villain's sister, who's the princess, and it's kind of this thing where he's falling in love with her, and she likes him, but they know that this is probably not going to work out. They're on both, she and her brother are connected because they're actually twins, and each time that he gets hurt, she gets hurt. So it's kind of like a tragic love story, and I just really enjoyed, I felt like this movie, there was just a lot of heart, and just you felt that when you're watching the film. It felt like very emotional for a comic book film. I really enjoyed all the action scenes. I thought they were shot really well. I love the environments. I mean, I feel like Guillermo del Toro does a great job of sprinkling horror elements into a lot of his films. And even though it's not a horror film, I really do enjoy just like the horror elements that are in there with just the setting designs and the monster designs. I just really enjoyed this film. I feel like it's a little underappreciated when people talk about, some of the best comic book movies. And a lot of people haven't seen the second one, but for me, that's number 10 on my list. Number 9 on my list is Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one. Guardians of the Galaxy was directed by James Gunn, who also directed movies like Super, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and The Suicide Squad. The Guardians of the Galaxy, if you don't know, they're a superhero team that was created by Dan Abnett and Andy Landing, and was first published in comics in April 2008. This is a comic book team that's published by Marvel Comics, and there's actually 2 versions of the Guardians of the Galaxy in comics. The original one came from the 60s and was created by Stan Lee. This version is like a rebooted version that doesn't have the same continuity as the last Guardians of the Galaxy, and that's what this movie's based on, the version from 2008 that has like a whole new lineup, which includes Star-Lord, Rocket Raccoon, Groot, Gamora, and Drax, which are the characters in this film. This film was released in the United States on August 1st, 2014. And in this film, you have Peter Quill, who also known as Star-Lord. He's played by Chris Pratt. He's on the run from bounty hunters after he steals an orb that is coveted by Ronan the Accuser, who's played by Lee Pace, who's the villain of the film. And eventually, Peter is thrown into jail, and he starts this uneasy alliance with these 4 misfits that he meets in this jail, and they go by the name the Guardians of the Galaxy. That includes Rocket Raccoon, who's voiced by Bradley Cooper. You have Groot, who's voiced by Vin Diesel. He's like this tree-like humanoid character. You have Gamora, played by Zoe Saldana. And then you have Drax the Destroyer, who's played by Dave Bautista. And his motivation is he wants, vengeance for the death of his family that was caused by Ronan. So, overall, they're just they're on this journey to run away with the orb, and then they find out how powerful the orb really is, and now they have to fight off Ronan the Accuser's henchmen while also trying to save the universe. Overall, the thing I really enjoy about this film is just the chemistry between all the characters and the relationship between them. I really love team-up movies where you have a group of people, a lot of times, like in this film, they don't know each other before, maybe they don't trust each other, but as the movie goes along, they learn to trust each other, they learn to work together as a team and fight whatever evil forces. I loved just the aesthetic of this movie. It has this very 80s feel with the soundtrack, with all the references. Basically, Peter was abducted in the 80s when he was like 10 or 11, taken to space, so all of his Earth references are from the 80s, which is really cool. I also really enjoy just the visuals of this film. It's a very colorful film. It's also filmed in space, which is unique to other Marvel movies. And yeah, I really like James Gunn as director. I feel like he adds the right balance of humor and action to his films. They never feel boring. They have a really good pace to them. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this film when it came out, and it's number 9 on my list. Okay, let's go to number 8 on my list, and that would be Joker. Joker is a film directed by Todd Phillips, who previous to Joker, he's mostly known as a comedy director. He directed movies like Road Trip, Old School, the Hangover series. So it was really surprising that he would direct this film, which is much more of a drama film. It's very serious. It's a very dark film. So this was kind of out of his comfort zone, but I think he did an amazing job with this. The cast members, you have Joaquin Phoenix, Robert De Niro, Zazie Beetz, and Francis Conroy. And the character of Joker, if you don't know, he's like the main arch enemy of the superhero Batman. And he was created in the 40s. His first appearance was in Batman #1. And it was created by Bill Finger, Bob Kane, and Jerry Robinson, and published by DC Comics. So this is a movie based on a DC comic character. Joker, in terms of character, he's a criminal mastermind and psychopath. He has this warped sense of humor. His backstory has changed a couple times over the years, but the basic backstory is he fell into this tank of chemical waste. It bleached his skin. It made his hair turn green. His lips all bright red. He has no superhero abilities, but he has experience in chemical engineering, so he uses those skills to develop these lethal equipment that he uses to create mayhem, basically, in Gotham City. And this film was released in the United States on October 4th, 2019. And it also made over $1 billion in the box office, so it was a really big hit when it came out. So in this movie you have Arthur Fleck, who's played by Joaquin Phoenix. He's a lonely, failed comedian who seeks connections from people as he walks down the streets in Gotham City. Arthur's day job is as a clown. That's his job, so he paints on the clown makeup, and that's how they kind of introduce the look of the Joker in this film. And he always tries to fit in with society, and society kind of rejects him. They bully him because he has this disorder where he uncontrollably laughs. He can't control it, which again is a cool, interesting way of how they introduce Joker's personality and his character into this more realistic setting. As this film goes along, you get to see Arthur slowly descend into this madness and criminal character. He starts having violent outbursts. He starts yelling at the people around him, hurting the people around him, and he slowly transforms into the Joker character that you traditionally find in the comic books. But I feel like this movie, where it really shines, it just shows like a realistic setting of where someone like the Joker could exist in our world, or at least a realistic version of our world. There's no superheroes or superpowers in this, which I think Joker's a great character for because he doesn't have any superpowers, even though he's in Gotham City where there's so many different people with powers. Joker has always been someone without powers, a very grounded criminal and supervillain, which in some ways makes him even more scary. But in this film, I feel like they do a great job of just grounding the character even more, making him relatable and sympathetic, especially, he deals with a lot of mental health issues, and I feel like this film does a really good job of portraying mental health issues and how people treat people with mental health issues, how society views them. And as you're watching this film, it's really just a character study of, when you're bullying someone, so much and they're not getting help, and it's just not improving, how eventually it just leads down this very dark path, and you just see that as the film goes along. I really enjoy just the filmmaking of this. The cinematography is great. The use of score is great, and just visually it has this kind of effect that makes it feel like it's taking place in the 40s or 50s. You get to see a young Bruce Wayne and the Waynes in this film. And you get to see how they're included into the plot, which is very interesting. It's very heartbreaking when you see the relationship between Arthur and his mother, and how the abuse of his parents onto him has led to him abusing the world, basically. And then I really like the ending of this film. I feel like it gives a chance for a sequel because of just how it ends and the conclusion that leads to. And it just makes sense to me, the ending, it reminds me a lot of the movie Taxi Driver, where you're just following a character slowly becoming worse and worse, and you see from the start where this innocent character starts really transforming into this evil person. So that was number 8 on my list, Joker. Number 7 on my list is Spider-Man Homecoming. This is the first Spider-Man film in the MCU, following the Sam Raimi trilogy of the early 2000s with Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. Then you had the 2 Andrew Garfield Spider-Man films. So this is the first one handled by the MCU in the MCU universe. You have Tom Holland portraying Spider-Man in this film. So this film was directed by John Watts. The other cast members in this film include Michael Keaton, Robert Downey Jr., Jon Favreau, Marissa Tomei, and Zendaya. This film was released in the United States on July 7th, 2017. And a little bit of background on Spider-Man, if you don't know, he was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko in 1962 and was published by Marvel Comics. His first appearance was in Amazing Fantasy number 15, released in August of 1962. And then after that, he's had a multitude of runs and has become one of the most popular superheroes of all time. Peter Parker in the comics that this is based on, which this is actually based on the Ultimate Spider-Man series by Brian Michael Bendis. Peter Parker is a high school student who's raised by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben in New York City after his parents died in a plane crash. Peter gets spider-related powers after he's bitten by a radioactive spider. This includes being able to cling to surfaces. He has superhuman strength and agility, and he's capable to detect danger before it happens with his spider sense. He also has these wrist mountain web shooters that he created that allow artificial spider webs to sling out that he uses to traverse around the city. And he uses these superpowers to fight criminals and supervillains in New York City under the alias of Spider-Man. So in this film, you have Peter Parker, played by Tom Holland. He lives with his Aunt May, played by Marissa Tomei. And this is after his experience with the Avengers in Captain America Civil War. He's being mentored by Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr. And he's in this conflict because he's trying to balance his life between being a high school student and being Spider-Man and saving people. And it's a really difficult balance for him because he wants to be a normal high school student. He wants to have a girlfriend, have friends, but he can't hang out and go to parties because he has to save the world, or at least New York City, as Spider-Man. In this film, the villain is the Vulture, played by Michael Keaton, and he has to stop the Vulture as he threatens everything that he holds dear to him. So overall, I really enjoyed this film. I've always been a fan of Spider-Man and Spider-Man films, especially the Sam Raimi trilogy. I just think Peter Parker and Spider-Man are just very relatable characters. I think Peter Parker is a very relatable character. A high school student who's kind of nerdy, kind of struggles making friends, being super social, and then has to manage all that with being Spider-Man and getting these powers. Having to balance all that is very difficult. And I think this movie does a great job of showing that. I enjoyed the performance of his friend Ned. I think he adds a lot of heart to the film, and he's just a great friend to have for Peter Parker. So I like how they showed off that Peter has a friend that he can confide in, which I feel like the other Spider-Man movies don't really have. I also feel like this film did a really great job with the casting. I feel like all the kids feel like they're in high school. They seem age appropriate. Just their acting just feels like high school kids. Tom Holland, I think, does a great job as Peter Parker. He has a lot of humor, but I think he really just sells the character and sells the role of someone who is a little nerdy, but is also, trying to get out of his comfort zone, trying to go parties, trying to, be a normal high school kid, and, he struggles with doing that while, trying to have his duties as Spider-Man. This film was just really fun. It was just a fun film. There's a lot of great action scenes in this. The plot is really good. There's great twists and turns in the plot. And overall, I really enjoyed this film. It's my favorite of the Spider-Man MCU films, but I like all of them so far. That was number 7 on my list, Spider-Man Homecoming. Number 6 on my list is Thor Ragnarok. This was the third film in the Thor MCU film series. You had the original Thor movie from 2011, and then you had Thor: The Dark World from 2013. This film was directed by Taika Waititi. He also directed films like Hunt for the Wilder People and Jojo Rabbit. He also voices Korg, who appears in this film. The main cast, you have Chris Hemsworth, who plays Thor. You have Tom Hiddleston, Tessa Thompson, Cate Blanchett, Mark Ruffalo, Idris Elba, and Jeff Goldblum. A little bit of background on the character of Thor. Thor was created by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby in 1962 and was published by Marvel Comics. He's based on a god in Norse mythology named Thor, and he's also a founding member of the group The Avengers. This film was released in the United States on November 3rd, 2017. And Thor, basically, he's an Asgardian god of thunder. He has this hammer called Mjolnir that allows him to fly, manipulate weather. He has superhuman strength and speed, durability. So that's he's basically a god in the Marvel Universe, very powerful, and is a member of the Avengers. And this film, this takes place after, again, the sequel, Thor: The Dark World. You see Thor, he's imprisoned on the other side of the universe, where he's in this gladiator, he's placed into this gladiator contest that pits him against the Hulk, which is who's played by Mark Ruffalo. And while he's there, he also meets Valkyrie, who's played by Tessa Thompson. And then the three of them go on this quest to fight the all-powerful Hela, who's played by Cate Blanchett. And overall, I just really enjoyed the aesthetic of this film. I enjoy it. Just feels like a very colorful film. It reminded me a lot of the same vibes I got when I saw Guardians of the Galaxy. Just lots of colors. The filmmaking is amazing. I love the cinematography. It just feels different and just like a fresh air from all the other Marvel films. I love the relationship that Thor has with Hulk and Valkyrie. I feel like they're kind of this trio that on paper shouldn't work together, but all their strengths and weaknesses go well together. The humor is great, and the team up honestly really reminds me again, of the Guardians of the Galaxy, where you have these four members who on paper don't seem like they would go together, but they just have a great humor to them. And in this film, it's the same thing. And a lot of credit goes to Taika Waititi, who's the director of this film. I feel like he does a great job of directing these actors, and you can really tell the chemistry, especially with Thor. In the first Thor film and then Thor: The Dark World, Thor was more of a serious character, and I feel like after the Avenger films where you see Thor, they started to develop Thor as more of a comical character. And I feel like in this film it has that perfect balance between Thor being a serious badass character, but also having those moments of humor and comedy that I think work really, really well. Overall, I like the plot of this film. I like when Loki shows up and they all work together. I thought that worked out really well. And Loki's great in this movie. Tom Hiddleston does a great job in Loki in every movie, and his acting's amazing, and I really just enjoyed his role in this film. So that was number 6 on the list for me, Thor Ragnarok. Number 5 on my list is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This is a sequel to the first Captain America movie, Captain America: The First Avenger, which came out in 2011. I really enjoyed that film too, but this one was directed by the Russo brothers, who went on to direct multiple Captain America and Avenger films, including Civil War, Infinity War, Avengers Infinity War, and then Avengers Endgame. This film has Chris Evans as Captain America, you have Scarlett Johansson as the Black Widow, you have Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, you have Sebastian Stan, Robert Redford, and Anthony Mackie. And Captain America, he's one of the oldest comic book characters, at least Marvel characters. He's created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby in 1941. He was extremely popular during World War II when this comic came out because he represented American patriotism during the time of World War II. And a little bit of background on the character: you have Steve Rogers, aka Captain America. He's this frail young artist who's enhanced to the peak of human perfection by the experimental super soldier serum after joining the military to aid the US government in World War II. Near the end of the war, he was trapped in ice and survived in suspended animation until he was revived in modern times. Although Captain America often struggles to maintain his ideals as a man out of his time, he remains a highly respected figure both with the American public and the superhero community, which includes him becoming a long-time leader of the Avengers. So this film follows the events that happened in the movie The Avengers, where you had the Avengers teaming up for the first time and fight off Loki in New York. You have Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, played by Chris Evans. He lives in the nation's capital as he tries to adjust to modern times. An attack on a S.H.I.E.L.D. colleague throws Rogers into a web of intrigue that places the whole world at risk. Joining forces with the Black Widow, played by Scarlett Johansson, and a new ally, the Falcon, played by Anthony Mackie, Rogers struggles to expose an ever-widening conspiracy, but he and his team soon come up against an unexpected enemy. I really enjoyed this movie a lot when it came out. Felt a lot different than other Marvel films because this movie in its foundation is a spy thriller, which I feel like is unique to the Marvel universe and comic book films in general, really. And it's a very good spy thriller mixed with the traditional tones of a Marvel film. I really love all the action scenes in this film. The fight choreography is amazing, especially, of course, the elevator scene with Captain America is great. The fight that Captain America and the Winter Soldier has on that freeway is amazing. The scene in the beginning of the movie where they're on the boat felt very much like a James Bond type film, or even it reminded me a lot of the video game Call of Duty. There's like a ship mission in one of the games. It reminded me a lot of. But But yeah, like the fighting and the choreography of these scenes is amazing. In terms of the characters, I really enjoyed Anthony Mackie's take as the Falcon in this film. I think he doesn't have a lot of scenes in this movie, but I think he does a really good job in the scenes that he has. He comes off as very likable, as someone who's, is just really cool. His costume and his abilities are really cool. And then, Scarlett Johansson, I think, does a great job as the Black Widow in this film. Her chemistry with Chris Evans, you can tell right away is there. Obviously, they've been in a lot of movies before in the past, even non-Marvel movies, so you can really see that chemistry in this film. I love, the small parts where Samuel L. Jackson is in this film too, and just the whole vibe of this movie, I think, is amazing. And then the Winter Soldier is just really cool. He was just a cool villain to have in this movie. He really shows off his power when he fights Captain America, and there's just so many scenes in this film that just amazing, and they leave you on the edge of your seat. So yeah, that's number 5 on my list, and it's one of my favorite Marvel movies. Number 4 on my list is The Batman. This is a movie directed by Matt Reeves, who also directed movies like Cloverfield, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and War of the Planet of the Apes. This movie has Robert Pattinson as Bruce Wayne, aka Batman. This also has Zoe Kravitz, Jeffrey Wright, Colin Farrell, Paul Dano, John Turturro, and Andy Serkis. So Batman, if you don't know, he's one of the most popular comic book superheroes of all time. He was created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger and published by DC Comics. His first appearance was in March of 1939 in Detective Comics number 27. Basically, Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, he's a wealthy American playboy, an industrialist who lives in Gotham City. As a kid, he witnesses the murder of his parents, and he uses his vast resources that he has to seek vengeance against criminals and supervillains as the masked superhero Batman. Batman has no superpowers, but he trains himself very physically, intellectually, and he has this bat-inspired persona that he uses to intimidate and fight criminals on the street of Gotham City at nighttime. So this movie, you have Batman, played by Robert Pattinson. He goes into the underworld of Gotham City, where a sadistic killer leaves behind a trail of cryptic clues. As the evidence begins to lead closer to home, the scale of the perpetrator's plans becomes clear. He must forge new relationships, amass the culprit, and bring justice to the abuse of power and corruption that has long plagued Gotham City. So overall, I'm a really big fan of this film. I think they did an amazing job of capturing the tone of the Batman comic books, especially the darker Batman comic books, like Batman The Long Halloween, Year One, Hush. Some of these Batman comics that have this darker tone to them, I feel like they captured that perfectly in this film. The whole film feels very dark and gothic. Gotham City itself feels like a character, a very dark character, and I just feel like this movie is not trying to be one of those flashy superhero films that is really trying to show off its budget or anything. It just feels very grounded. It just feels like a film that you can view it as this comic book movie, but you really just see this character and the background that he goes through, the trauma that he goes through, and him trying to help out the city, that it almost feels like the city doesn't want to be helped. There's just so many there's just so much history of corruption and power gone wrong in this city that it feels like justice is unearned. Like there's no way that justice is even going to be allowed in Gotham City. So yeah, just the tone overall is just amazing in this film. I loved the detective nature of Batman in this movie. In this movie, Batman, it's one of the first Batman movies I've seen where he really feels like a detective, which especially in books like Year One, the early Batman comic books, that's really what he was. He's a detective first. He's looking at clues, he's trying to solve the crime. And I feel like this movie, with not having any of these supervillains with powers and stuff, this movie felt way more grounded and way more like a classic noir detective film, which are some of my favorite films. I think Robert Pattinson does a great job as Bruce Wayne and Batman. I like how he plays the character in more of like an emo way, where it shows Batman and Bruce Wayne as someone who's truly damaged psychologically from seeing his parents murdered in front of him. So he grows up very much as like a loner, someone that deals with a lot of like PTSD from that. And I feel like that's just a different take on Bruce Wayne that you see in a lot of other films, where Bruce Wayne is more of this playboy, he's very lavish, he gets all the girls. This film, it feels like Bruce Wayne is struggling mentally, trying to get over the death of his parents and trying to bring justice into Gotham City, where it feels like Gotham City doesn't want justice and wants to remain this place of corruption. I like how Carmine Falcone is one of the villains in this movie, played by John Turturro. I think it's cool that they're including mob villains for Batman, which you see multiple times in the comics, including Long Halloween, which again I think is a big inspiration for this movie. I really enjoyed the Penguin in this film. He doesn't have like a huge villain role, but I like the parts that he's in. I think it's very well done. I liked Zoe Kravitz as Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman, in this film. Her chemistry with Robert Pattinson as Batman just works really, really well. It's very believable. You can believe the romance there. You can believe the tension there. So yeah, I was just really impressed with the character work in this movie, the tone of the film. Also, I want to mention Jeffrey Wright as Lieutenant Gordon. I think he does a great job as Lieutenant Gordon. He works with Batman to solve these crimes, but he doesn't feel like this character that's just there just to be there, or just totally depends on Batman. He really helps Batman with solving these crimes, comes off as very smart, very capable. And I really enjoyed the fight scenes in this movie too. They felt very grounded, which I always love in fight scenes. The choreography was really, really good. And just overall, I just like the messaging in this film, how it just portrayed Gotham City as this, place that's just been abused for years. And that kind of correlates with Batman, who's been through so much. And both of them are trying to heal together, and by the end of the film, you really feel like Batman is starting to make an impact on Gotham City, and is not just out for vengeance for himself, for selfish reasons. So yeah, that was number 4 on the list, The Batman. I really enjoyed this movie. So number 3 on my list is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This is a film directed by Bob Persichilli, Peter Ramsey, and Rodney Rothman. The voice casting for this film includes Shameik Moore, Jake Johnson, Haley Steinfeld, Mahershala Ali, Brian Tyree Henry, and Lily Tomlin. This film is based on the character of Miles Morales, who is the second version of Spider-Man to appear in the Ultimate Marvel Universe, which is a separate continuity from the mainstream Marvel Universe, also known as Earth 616. But this character of Miles was created by Brian Michael Bendis and Sarah Pichelli, and it was published by Marvel Comics. Miles Morales' first appearance was in Ultimate Fallout number 4, released in August of 2011. This film was released in the United States on December 14th, 2018. So some background on the character of Miles. He's a 13-year-old biracial teenager. His father is African American and his mother is Puerto Rican. After Peter Parker's death in the comics, Miles puts on the Spider-Man suit and fights the criminals in New York City as Spider-Man. His backstory in terms of how he got his powers is very similar to the original backstory of Spider-Man, where he gets bitten by a radioactive spider. Just a little bit of the background is different. And he has similar powers to Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man. He just has the added powers of invisibility and a bioelectric energy thread produced from his fingers. So in this film, this is a 3D animated film mixed with 2D hand animated drawings to create this really cool animation effect. But in this film, you have Miles Morales. He's a Brooklyn teenager who's bitten by a radioactive spider in a subway. He's voiced by Shameik Moore. He suddenly develops these mysterious powers that transform him into the one and only Spider-Man. Eventually he meets Peter Parker, voiced by Jake Johnson. He soon realizes that there are many others who share his special high-flying talents. Miles must now use his newfound skills to battle the evil Kingpin, a hulking madman who can open portals to other universes and pull different versions of Spider-Man into our world. This film really blew my mind when I saw it, just because the animation on this film is like something I've never seen before. It's this really cool mixture between 3D animation and 2D animation. It creates this really cool effect where the movie feels like it's taken straight out of the comic books, like you're seeing the comic book come to life. The different backgrounds are really amazing, super detailed. It has this kind of 3D effect, almost like 3D, but when you have your glasses taken off, there's like this almost like layering feel to it. It's a super colorful film, and the really cool thing about this film is it's almost a love letter to Spider-Man fans. It has so many different references to Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, all the different versions of Spider-Man in the comic books. Because basically in this film, the portal opens up and all these different Spider-Mans from the multiverse come into Miles' world. And you get to meet characters like Spider-Gwen, who becomes one of the main characters in this film, who works with Miles Morales and Peter Parker to fight the Kingpin. You have people like Spider-Pig, who's like a pig version of Spider-Man. You have like Spider-Noir, and there's all these different Spider-Man characters from different versions of Marvel Comics, which is just really cool and interesting. But it still doesn't feel too crazy, because you still are there with Miles throughout his journey. You see the relationship that he has with his parents, especially his father, who's a police officer. And this just leads to a lot of conflict between Miles and his father. You also have the relationship between Miles and his uncle, which is very interesting. Another thing I really enjoyed about this film was how emotional the backstory was of these Spider-Man characters. You know, they all have gone through loss of family members and friends, and throughout this movie, you really see, even though they're all from different universes, they all share a lot of the same backstory, and that really is what brings them together. And I really like how they all work together. The personality of all these characters come together perfectly. The pacing of this movie is great. The humor is great in this film. I also really liked Jake Johnson's portrayal of Peter Parker in this film. I think that was really good voice casting for that role. It's cool that he's the Peter Parker, the same version of Peter Parker from the Sam Raimi trilogy, so there's a lot of references to that. But I just like, there's this really great connection between him and Miles that almost feels like maybe like a father-son or like brother connection. That's really enjoyed with this movie. Also, I think it's really cool to have representation in films, and with Miles Morales being the first ever black Spider-Man character, I think it's really cool that they made a movie including Miles, and I think he's just a really cool character. I think he has enough personality differences that sets him apart from Peter Parker, but they still have this bond with their story. So that's number 3 on my list, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and that's just a film I really, really enjoy. So number 2 on my list is The Dark Knight. This film was a sequel to the 2005 film Batman Begins, directed by Christopher Nolan. This film's also directed by Christopher Nolan, who, if you don't know Christopher Nolan, he's best known for movies like Memento, Batman Begins, Inception, The Dark Knight Rises, and Dunkirk. He's also directed a lot of other films that I really enjoy. He's definitely one of my favorite directors. The casting for this movie, you have Christian Bale as Batman, you have Heath Ledger as the Joker, you have Michael Caine as Alfred, Gary Oldman as Lieutenant Gordon, Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent. Then you also have Maggie Gyllenhaal and Morgan Freeman. So this film was released in the United States on July 18th, 2008, and it made $1 billion in the box office, which in 2008 was a huge deal. It was a huge success at the time. And the summary of this movie, so you have Lieutenant Jim Gordon, played by Gary Oldman, and Harvey Dent, who's the district attorney, played by Aaron Eckhart, and Batman, played by Christian Bale. The three of them team up to try to put a tight lid on the crime in Gotham City. And this works until there's this anarchist criminal mastermind calling himself the Joker, played by Heath Ledger. He suddenly throws the town into complete chaos and tests how far Batman will go in order to save Gotham City. Now, when this movie was released and I saw it, it blew me away. Just everything from the opening scene, where you have the bank robbery scene with your introduction to the character of Joker. It's just so well done. The cinematography is amazing, which is just common in all of Christopher Nolan's films. He's very good at directing the camera and putting you into those, making you feel like you're in the situations with the characters. You feel the tension throughout this whole entire film, which I feel like is a perfect representation of the Joker character. And the Joker character in this movie, played by Heath Ledger, is just an amazing performance. You know, he's a character that's just a complete madman that always is just such a scary character, because you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know what he's going to do, you're always just on the edge of your seat. There's just so much tension with this character. He doesn't care about money, he doesn't care about fame, he just cares about causing chaos and just harming others and just being crazy. And I just love the chaotic nature of Joker. I feel like they captured that so well from books like Batman The Killing Joke from Alan Moore, also Batman The Man Who Laughs from Ed Brubaker, even the Batman animated series TV show, the representation of Joker in there. It's like all these different combinations of Joker. I feel like they really captured that comic booky, just madman, crazy anarchist feel with the Joker, and all the credit goes to Heath Ledger with that performance. It's tragic that he never got to see his performance in the full film before he passed away, but man, his performance is just breathtaking, and really puts this film just high up on my list of films of all time. Batman as Christian Bale. Christian Bale as Batman, I thought did an amazing job. Coming off of Batman Begins, which is another film I really enjoy. I feel like he really developed that character in the Batman Begins movie, and now you see Christian Bale just feels like he's just in that character. His voice I love, even though I know some people don't like it. I love it just feels very terrifying when you hear that. For the criminals, when you hear that Batman deep voice, he just gets so much into this character. And then all the other side characters in this film. You have Michael Caine as Alfred. I think he does a great job, especially in this movie. He doesn't have a lot of scenes, but the scenes he has make such a great impact. And obviously Michael Caine is a legendary actor. He's been doing it for multiple years, and he just does a really, really great job in this film. He brings some emotion to the movie that I really enjoy. You have Gary Oldman as Lieutenant Gordon. Gary Oldman is one of my favorite actors, and he's one of those like almost chameleon actors. You can play all these different type of roles, and to me, he's the best version of Jim Gordon that they ever had on film. I just love how he has this almost like sympathetic nature to him, but he's still, just like a badass cop. He works with the Batman, but he can still hold his own, which I really, really enjoy. Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent is another character in this film who I think has an amazing arc. You see him in the beginning of the film. He's this, district attorney who's trying to bring justice into Gotham City, trying to clean up the streets, who's willing to work with Batman, who's also working with Jim Gordon, and the three of them working together to really clean up the city of Gotham. And they've done such a great job, especially in the beginning of the film, until the Joker comes on. And I feel like with Joker being such a ruthless, mysterious villain, it's a great contrast to Two-Face, Harvey Dent, who's this villain that has a previous relationship with Batman. But Bruce Wayne knows, Jim Gordon knows. So to see him turn evil, it has that much more of an impact on the viewer, because you saw that whole journey from him becoming good to evil. I also love that in this film, Christopher Nolan uses practical effects for his explosions, for his action scenes, and it makes the film feel like more gritty, more grounded, and just makes all the impacts feel more real. The scene I think about is the hospital explosion scene, which was filmed with a real explosion, so they only had one take for that, which is amazing. And all the fight scenes, just feel so realistic, with the impact of all the hits. Just the tension that you get in this film, just because the action is it has this almost like loud, soft feel to it. This very volatile feel where the movie will feel very quiet. It'll be these normal scenes, and then explosions happen, and this huge, eruption of sound, and it just always keeps you on the edge of your seat. So, this is one of my favorite films. I think it's just so well done. Every aspect of the filmmaking is amazing, and the plot is great. The ending's great. This is an amazing film. I definitely recommend it. And that was number 2 on my list, The Dark Knight. Now, before I get to my number 1 comic book movie of all time, I wanted to go through some honorable mentions. These are just films that I thought were really great comic book films, but they just weren't good enough to break into my top 10 list. So the first film I wanted to talk about as an honorable mention was the film Kick-Ass. This was a film directed by Matthew Vaughn, who went on to direct other comic book films like X-Men First Class and all 3 of the Kingsman movies. The cast of this film included Aaron Johnson, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, Mark Strong, Chloe Grace Moretz, and Nicolas Cage. And this film was released in the United States on April 16th, 2010. Now, Kick-Ass, this is a comic book series that was initially published by Marvel Comics under their Icon imprint, which is like for their more indie type comics, but was later republished under Image Comics. The series was written by Mark Millar and illustrated by John Romita Jr., and the series ran from February 2008 to August 2014. And in this movie, you have the character of Dave Lewinsky, played by Aaron Johnson. He's a teenager who uses his love for comics as inspiration when he decides to reinvent himself as a superhero, despite a complete lack of superpowers. So Dave dons a costume, he dubs himself as Kick-Ass, and gets to work fighting crime. He joins forces with the father-daughter vigilante team of Big Daddy, played by Nicolas Cage, and Hit Girl, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, and then befriends another crime fighter named Red Mist, played by Christopher Mintz-Plasse. And you see these characters go up against a mobster family, which soon puts the alliance between Red Mist and Kick-Ass to the test. Now, this was a film that when it came out, I was a teenager at the time, and I was really into these kind of R-rated comedy films like Superbad, like Knocked Up, a lot of the Judd Apatow films. And this film really, when it came out, for me, felt like one of those films mixed with comic book, superhero story. And I really enjoyed that mix, I really like that the Kick-Ass universe feels very realistic. It feels like our real world, basically what would happen if some normal guy in our real world decided to put on a costume and become a superhero. I thought that the concept was very interesting because you don't see a lot of movies like this where you actually show the superhero getting his ass kicked multiple times, actually being in danger because he doesn't have any powers and he's fighting people in the real world who have guns, like real mobsters, real criminals. I thought the humor in this film was really great. I think Matthew Vaughn does a great job of putting humor into his movies, especially his comic book related films. I think Aaron Johnson, does a good job as Kick-Ass, but what really elevates this movie for me are the characters around Kick-Ass. Christopher Mintz-Plasse, I don't know exactly how you say his name, but he plays Red Mist, and I think he does a great job in this role. He's a really funny character that obviously is very spoiled. He's a spoiled kid who dresses up as a superhero. And it's interesting about him is because he has so much money, he has all the cool cars, all the cool gadgets. So I think that's a really cool and just like funny dynamic with Kick-Ass, who's more like homegrown. He makes all his own stuff. And there's actually a really interesting plot line between the two of them, and that really impacts the climax of this story. Then you have Big Daddy and Hit Girl. Big Daddy played by Nicolas Cage, and Hit Girl played by Chloe Grace Moretz. And I feel like they add a whole different element to this movie because they feel like they're the professional, superheroes. They know all the martial arts. They have all the weapons. They're actually going out there and killing the real criminals. And they kind of take Kick-Ass under his wing. They understand that this guy is a kid. He doesn't really know what he's doing. But I thought it was a really cool, I thought both of them were really cool characters, and especially Hit Girl, because she's this little girl who curses a bunch. She's killing up all these bad guys, and it's just not something you would normally see in a comic book movie or basically any film. So it has this kind of shock value to that. And just overall, this is not the best superhero film in terms of plot. I mean, the plot is kind of basic. But I just like the setting and the characters. I think it's a very funny movie. And I just really wanted to mention this film in the honorable mentions because when this came out, I was a huge fan of this film, and I just really enjoyed how different it was. So my next honorable mention is V for Vendetta. This was directed by James McTeague and written by the Wachowskis. If you don't know the Wachowskis, they're the ones that directed the Matrix series. The casting in this film, you have Natalie Portman, Hugo Weaving, Stephen Ray, John Hurt, and Stephen Fry. This film was released in the United States on March 17th, 2006. And V for Vendetta is based on a comic book limited series called V for Vendetta. This was written by Alan Moore and illustrated by David Lloyd, and it was published under DC Comics under their Vertigo imprint, which again was kind of the DC version of their more indie comics. The series was 10 issues long and ran from March 1982 to May 1989. So this film takes place in London following a world war where now London is a police state that's occupied by this fascist government. And you have this anarchist vigilante wearing a Guy Fawkes mask known as V, who's played by Hugo Weaving, and he uses terrorist tactics to fight the fascist government in London where he now lives. When V saves a young woman named Evie, played by Natalie Portman, from the secret police, he discovers an ally in his fight against England's oppressors. Now, I'm a really big fan of Alan Moore and his work that he's done in comics, which includes Watchmen, which is like one of my favorite comics, A Killing Joke, which is another one I really love, and V for Vendetta, which is what this movie is based upon, and another comic book that I really enjoyed and read as a teenager. Now, one of the reasons why I include this film on this list as an honorable mention is because out of all the films that have been based on Alan Moore's comic books, I feel like this one does the best job of being an accurate representation of the source material that Alan Moore wrote. As a fan of the original graphic novel, I just really enjoyed how they implemented the feeling and just overall themes of the graphic novel into this film. It's not a perfect translation. There are some differences between the graphic novel and the film, but just overall the feeling and themes of the graphic novel still maintained in this film. You still have this kind of a state versus freedom thing, the people versus the government. A lot of influences from George Orwell's 1984 are in this movie. Just overall, this film is one of those movies that's very thought-provoking, and it's a social commentary on what would happen if you allowed the government to have control over its people to the point where they lose their free will and their ability to express themselves, to choose, their religion, their beliefs. Those are all opposed by the fascist government represented in this film. And visually, I think this film is really well done. It has a great contrast between, the government areas and the streets and the slums where, the poor people, the lower class people hang out. You really get to see both sides of London and how the setting and the world itself is almost a character, and how that really shows the differences between the two sides. And when it comes to the character of V, I think he's portrayed really well in this film. In this film, he's a little bit more of a romantic freedom fighter because he shows concern over the loss of innocent lives in this film compared to the graphic novel where he's a lot more ruthless. But I really like the portrayal of V in this film and the relationship that he has with Evie. You can tell that he really cares about her, and as the film develops, she starts growing more trust with V's character and really starts caring about him and understanding his goal, his mission to start this revolution with the people of London. I really enjoyed the fight scenes in this film too. I think the fight scenes again are very brutal, but they also feel just very grounded. The choreography I think is very well done. I think overall I really enjoyed this film. I enjoyed Natalie Portman's portrayal as Evie in this movie. Her story is very heartbreaking with all the tragedy that she goes through. Overall I really enjoyed this film, and I wanted to mention a film, at least one of the films from Alan Moore, because he's one of my favorite comic book writers. And to me, V for Vendetta is the best adaptation of his work placed onto film. So the next honorable mention that I wanted to talk about was Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. This was a film directed by Edgar Wright, who also directed movies like Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, Baby Driver, and The Last Night in Soho. This film stars Michael Cera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Alison Pill, Kieran Culkin, Chris Evans, and Brie Larson. This film was released in the United States on August 13th, 2010, and the film is based on the graphic novel series Scott Pilgrim, which was written and illustrated by Brian Lee O'Malley and published by Oni Press, which was an indie publisher. The series ran from August 2004 to July 2010. Now with this film, you have a bass guitarist for a garage rock band named Scott Pilgrim, played by Michael Cera. In this film, he meets Ramona Flowers, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and he falls in love with her, and when he starts to date her, he realizes that he has to deal with her evil exes. So she has an army of 7 evil exes that he has to fight in order for the chance to date Ramona. Now, I've actually never read the source material for this movie, the Scott Pilgrim graphic novel series. I've just seen this movie, and when I first saw this movie, I was just blown away with how much I enjoyed it. I just loved the visual aspects of this film, the way they portrayed Scott's thoughts, the way they moved the plot along while using these visuals as a form of visual storytelling. The way it felt like the film almost broke the fourth wall, and you really felt like you were watching a comic come to life with the different expressions that would show up in the thought bubbles on the film. The lighting in this movie, how they would light up different scenes, different characters to portray different emotions that they wanted to show. So yeah, visually, I just feel like this film is just really well done. So when it comes to the plot, I really enjoyed how Scott had to battle all these different exes, how each ex had their own personality, their own set of powers, things that made them unique, and again, how the visual style really enhanced those characters. Musically, I love the music in this film. I'm a big fan of indie rock music, and I think the music that Scott's band played, and just the other music throughout this film, I think really drives the film along and is a great aspect of this movie that I really enjoy. The character of Ramona Flowers, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I thought she did a really great job of portraying that character. As the movie goes along, you see her character develop more and more, and you learn more about her as Scott is fighting all of her exes. I also really just love the other supporting characters in this film. I think Alison Pill, Kieran Culkin, even Brie Larson, who has kind of a small role in the film. I think they all do a really great job as supporting actors in this film, really helping to build the world in this movie. And honestly, one of my least favorite characters in this film is actually Scott Pilgrim, played by Michael Cera. I'm not a huge fan of Michael Cera's acting, at least in the movies that I've seen him in, and I feel like this movie's kind of the same. He doesn't come off as that sympathetic of a character for me, so I've sometimes trouble rooting for him, especially the relationship he has with Knives in this movie is kind of messed up, and just like his acting, I'm not a big fan of, but the thing that really pushes this movie up for me, and one of the reasons I wanted to mention it, is the visuals of this film. I think really carry this movie, and the music. And a lot of credit goes to Edgar Wright, because in a lot of his other movies, he just does a great job of visual storytelling. And I feel like this movie, is a movie now that a lot of people consider to be like a cult hit. but at the time was really underrated, and it's definitely a movie that I would definitely recommend people to watch. And I think as time goes on, this movie becomes more and more well liked, and more appreciation is given, especially to the visual effects on this film, because not a lot of films before and after have done something on that level. So the last honorable mention I wanted to talk about before I get to my number one comic book movie of all time is the movie Ghost World. Ghost World is a movie based on the graphic novel Ghost World, which was written and illustrated by Daniel Clowes and published by Fantagraph Books, which is an indie publisher. The series originally ran in issues 11 through 18 of the comic book series 8 Ball, which was also written by Daniel Clowes, from September 1993 to April 1997. This movie was directed by Terry Zigoff and written by Terry Zigoff and Daniel Clowes. The cast includes Thora Birch, Scarlett Johansson, Steve Buscemi, and Brad Renfro. And this movie was released in the United States on July 20th, 2001. This was an independent film. The budget was only $7 million, and in the box office it made $9 million. So in this film, you have Enid, played by Thora Birch, and her best friend Rebecca, played by Scarlett Johansson. And they're a pair of, young outcasts who are best friends, who basically hate everything in the world, and they wander around this nameless American town, criticizing everyone around them while talking about pop culture and deciding what they want to do with their life after high school. They face a rift in their relationship when Enid takes interest in an older man named Seymour, played by Steve Buscemi, and becomes determined to help his romantic life. Now, this was a film that I didn't see until a lot later on after it came out. But once I had the opportunity to see this film, I was just really blown away by how much I enjoyed this film. I'm a really big fan of coming-of-age films, and this film is very much a coming-of-age film where you have these two girls who are best friends who, have this very pessimistic view on life, and they're trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives after high school. So when this film starts and you're introduced to these two girls, Rebecca and Enid, they actually come off as very unlikable, at least to me. They make fun of other people based on their looks, based on their jobs. They really have no regard for, where other people come from, their experiences, what they had to go through. It's just these two girls are kind of living in their own world where they are the main characters and everyone else around them basically sucks, and they're just trying to survive through this, living this life on this earth. But as the film goes along, you start to sympathize more with these characters, and especially Enid's character, after she meets Seymour. And Seymour is played by Steve Buscemi. And you see that, she meets this guy Seymour, who's this older man, and, at first her and Rebecca are making fun of him, like they make fun of everyone, but Enid starts to kind of fall for Seymour and his quirkiness, and how he's not like the other guys who are more like the, machismo, douche bro type people. He is a lot more, sensitive into music. And, he kind of has the stereotype of that kind of, lonely older man who lives in his mom's basement type thing. And, they make fun of him at first, but she really starts to fall for him. And she's trying to help him out and help him get a relationship with the girl or with the woman. And, you see that journey. And that really causes a rift in a relationship between Enid and Rebecca. As Rebecca is starting to go on the path of almost in some ways conforming to the societal norms of, making sure she gets a job, try to fit in college, date more of the jockey type guys, while Enid is kind of staying firm with her weird self, this causes kind of a rift in their relationship. So it's one of those movies where, not a lot happens. You just kind of long for the ride, as, a lot of these coming of age teenage movies are, which I really enjoy. I think Steve Buscemi does a really great job of portraying the character Seymour. Throughout the film, he comes off as a very likable character, someone you can kind of sympathize with, someone who is very firm in his beliefs and what he likes, and he doesn't really conform to the societal norms. So he knows that people make fun of him, but he kind of just wants to stay in his lane and like what he likes. And Enid kind of breaks him out of his shell a little bit, but during this she kind of realizes that her personality shares a lot of similarities with Seymour. Another thing I really enjoyed about this film was the humor. Throughout this film, the two main characters, they have this kind of like deadpan humor that they make fun of other characters, make fun of their situations, their jobs, and just the way the humor comes off is very funny to me. It has, again, this kind of deadpan feel, but I just really enjoyed the dynamic between the two characters, and you can see realistically why their friendship is going through this rift that it's going through. Another thing I like about this movie is just the journey that the characters go on, and that you see that these characters who start off as very unlikable, as the movie goes on, they become more and more likable, in the sense that you understand their situation, what they're going through, which is a big transformation where you're graduating from high school and you don't know what you're going to do with your life. So I think that, again, is very relatable. And again, these characters that come off as unlikable in the beginning, they become more likable as the film goes on. Now, I've actually read the comic book, the graphic novel that this series is based on, after I saw the movie, and I actually didn't enjoy the graphic novel as much as I enjoyed the film. In the graphic novel, I feel like these characters are a lot meaner, and their journey isn't as fulfilling as it is in the movie. They kind of basically stay the same character that they were in the beginning of the book. So I feel like the book is one of those books that I understand why people like it, but for me, I prefer the movie because it feels like it's more plot. There's more plot in it, and the characters actually go on a journey. Now, I'm not gonna spoil the end of this film. All I'll say is I really like how the ending is left up to kind of viewers' interpretation, and you can really take this ending multiple different ways, and people have discussed what the ending really means. For me, it meant something different than probably for other people. So I like movies with endings like that kind of leave it up for interpretation. But yeah, overall, this is a very it's a hard film to recommend because it is kind of heavy. There are some sad scenes. There are some scenes where the characters come off as very unlikable. But it is a coming-of-age film where you see these characters slowly start to mature and kind of fall into place as the film goes along. And I think, Seymour, played by Steve Buscemi, I think he really helps the film and kind of gives it more likability. He's kind of like the character you root for throughout the film. And then all the other side characters that, have very small roles that, a lot of them are character actors. They just help build the world. And this world feels very realistic, almost through a pessimist's view of what the world is and how people are. But overall, I really enjoyed this film. I was surprised to learn it was based on a comic book. And I feel like this film's very underrated. I feel like got very good critical reviews. It was even nominated for Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. but in terms of popularity with the general public, I feel like this film is very underrated and underappreciated, and I wanted to mention as honorable mention so it can be talked about and more people can be aware of how great this film really is. So now we're going to go to my number one comic book movie of all time, and that is Logan. Logan is the third film in the Wolverine trilogy of films, following X-Men Origins Wolverine, which came out in 2009, and The Wolverine, which came out in 2013. This film was directed by James Mangold, who also directed the Wolverine film from 2013. The cast includes Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. You have Patrick Stewart as Professor X. You have Daphne Keane, Richard E. Grant, Boyd Holbrook, and Stephen Merchant. And this film was released in the United States on March 3rd, 2017. If you don't know the character of Wolverine, he was created in 1974 by Roy Thomas, Lee Wayne, and John Romita Sr., and was published by Marvel Comics. His first full comic book appearance was in The Incredible Hulk number 181, which was released in November of 1974. And he's considered one of the greatest comic book characters of all time. And for me personally, he's my favorite Marvel comic book character of all time. I really enjoy a lot of Chris Claremont's run with the X-Men, and especially the character development that he provided for Wolverine. So I'm going to go over a little bit of background on the character of Wolverine. Logan, aka Wolverine, is a mutant who possesses animal keen senses, enhanced physical capabilities, a powerful regenerative ability known as the healing factor, and 3 retractable adamantium claws in each hand. Wolverine is usually portrayed as this brooding loner who has no problem using deadly force to get the job done, unlike a lot of other Marvel superheroes. So a lot of people consider him to be an anti-hero. He's one of the main members of the superhero team, the X-Men, and has also been a member of the Avengers in the comic books. So this film takes place in the future in the year 2029. At this point in the timeline, there's been no mutants that have been born in the last 25 years. The film starts off with an aging Logan, aka Wolverine, who's played by Hugh Jackman, and he's caring for an ailing older Professor X, played by Patrick Stewart. And they're at this remote outpost on the border of Mexico and the United States. His plan to hide from the outside world gets upended when he meets a young mutant named Laura, played by Daphne Keane, who is very much like him. Logan must now protect Laura and battle the dark forces that want to capture her. So when this film came out, one of the really special things about this film was it was one of the few R-rated films that's based on a Marvel comic. You have Deadpool. You can talk about like the Blade movies, and there are some other films, but it's really rare for especially one of Marvel's like mainline superheroes in Wolverine to actually have an R-rated film. And I think that really lended itself to this film because Wolverine in the comics and other forms of media and the video games, I mean, his character is someone who kills people. I mean, that's what he uses his claws for, and I feel like if you're gonna do a movie about Wolverine, you have to show him killing people. And a lot of times with the PG-13 versions of movies featuring Wolverine, they don't show a lot of details and effects, the blood effects. They always kind of turn away because they want to keep that PG-13 rating. This film did a great job of just taking off all the reins on Wolverine and letting him be the Wolverine that you read about in the comics. And I think the R rating and the R rating, them not being afraid of making an R-rated film, allowed them so much freedom when it came to the characterization of Wolverine and the action scenes and just the story. I feel like it really supported the story really well. When I first saw this movie, I was just truly blown away by how much I enjoyed it, and just how beautiful this film is. It doesn't feel like a lot of other, superhero films, action films, where the spectacle is the main attraction. In this film, it truly is the characters. Starting off with Logan, Wolverine, played by Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman does an amazing job in this film. He started the character of Wolverine, playing the character of Wolverine since the first X-Men movie in the year 2000. So this is the end of Logan's journey, and the end of Hugh Jackman's journey as Wolverine. Throughout this film, you see this character who's been through it all. He started off as this loner that had nobody, and then he joined the X-Men. He gained a family, and that all gets taken away from him. And you start off this movie with Wolverine as this loner who's going through life waiting for his life to end, and he has no purpose in his life. He doesn't care about anybody else. He's just an angry old man that is just waiting for his life to end. And it's not until he meets the character of Laura and is tasked with protecting her and leading her on this journey does she's the character that really brings out the heart of Wolverine and gives him life and makes him want to care about something. So, the relationship that Wolverine and Laura have is amazing in this film and is what really drives the movie for me. Professor X in this film with Patrick Stewart, again, another character who's been there from the beginning, from the first X-Men that came out in the year 2000. You see his relationship with Logan and how that is morphed over the years, how it's become more confrontational, especially now that there's really no more mutants being born in the world. It's just them against all the other humans. And he's getting older. He's going through mental health issues. His body's breaking down. And the trust and the relationship between him and Logan is just falling apart. There's just been a huge rift in the relationship, and as this film goes along, you see that relationship build back up. And it's just so well done in this film. The cinematography in this film is amazing. It blows my mind how much I just feel. This almost just feels like an art film that's a superhero film, really. It's one of those films that reminds me a lot of The Dark Knight, in the sense of just the camera work and the way that it just feels so artistic, how every shot feels meaningful, like there's a purpose to it. And then the character of Laura. When you meet Laura and you see her upbringing, where she came from, you're immediately drawn to her, you're sympathetic to her. The actress Daphne Keane, I think does an amazing job, especially as a child actress, at displaying emotion at the correct times and really making you sympathetic about this character. And you see their journey, the three of them going on this journey together, the chemistry that they have, and how much Wolverine and Laura connect on this father-daughter relationship. The connection that they have is just so powerful. And then the plot of this film, you have these villains who I really actually enjoyed. Boyd Holbrook's representation as the villain in this film. I think he does a really great job as the villain. He doesn't have a lot of screen time, but when he does have screen time, he uses it well. And overall, I think the villains aren't like the main purpose of the film, but they give the characters motivation and they move the plot along. But I think they do a really great job with the villains in this movie. But the real reason why this movie is number one for me is the climax and the ending. It's just so emotional and powerful, especially for a superhero film. Just the tragedy that takes place, how much motivation these characters have, how much you're rooting for these characters after certain events happen, how evil some of the villains are in this film. And it's one of those films you're just on the edge of your seat, you're motivated throughout, you're emotional throughout, and the ending just feels like the perfect ending to the X-Men film series, really, and the story of Wolverine. So yeah, overall this is my number one film. I feel like, so again, the acting performances are amazing, the filmmaking, the camera work is amazing, the plot pulls at your heartstrings, especially near the end. I didn't talk about the action. The action in this movie is amazing. It feels so raw and visceral. The fact that they made an R-rated film, they can show blood, and it shows also the real fierceness of Wolverine and the ruthlessness of Wolverine that I feel like the comics captured better than the films. And I'm so happy that Wolverine finally got a really good Wolverine film, because I feel like X-Men Origins Wolverine was a terrible film, really, for me, in my opinion. And the Wolverine, while I like that film and I like how it was based on the Wolverine comic book by Chris Claremont, which I really liked. This film I feel like is such a better representation of the character of Logan, not just the action, but just the characterization of Logan, that throughout this film, he hates everybody, he hates the world, he's the stereotypical loner anti-hero superhero who's just living his life, trying to wait for his death and just trying to just live to die almost. And in this film you just see the character development and how his life changes because he's tasked with taking care of this young mutant in Laura. So that's my favorite comic book movie of all time. And quickly, I'll just recap my list again. So on number 10 on my list was Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. Number 9 was Guardians of the Galaxy. Number 8 was Joker. Number 7 is Spider-Man: Homecoming. Number 6 is Thor: Ragnarok. Number 5 is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Number 4 is The Batman. Number 3 is Spider-Man: Into the Spider-Verse. Number 2 is The Dark Knight. And my number 1 favorite comic book movie of all time is Logan. So that does it for this podcast episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.